UPS has a purpose and a promise to deliver what matters for people and our planet. Volunteering 30 million hours and planting 50 million trees by 2030. Impacting the lives of 1 billion by 2040. And going 100% carbon neutral by 2050. Big goals for a brighter future. It starts by doing what's right and holding ourselves accountable. Getting it done with creative thinkers, problem solvers, and those who think way outside the box. Making sure everyone has a seat, a voice, and belongs. That's our purpose, that's our promise. Change is everywhere, and it starts right here. UPS has a purpose and a promise.
Okay, good afternoon, good morning from wherever you are joining us. Welcome to day two, our last session of day two, in fact, at the PBEC Annual Dialogue Summit for 2022. And I'm delighted that we're finishing on a very important economy of APEC, Canada. And we're so honored to have so many distinguished leaders from Canada who represent Canada in their everyday lives, whether it's Canadian business interests and representing Canada in this part of the world in Asia. So happy to be handing now over to David Armitage, who's one of our board of directors at PBEC, but is also a founder and a proponent, if you like, for digital transformation at Velocity Solutions. So David, you're on mute. If you want to unmute yourself, everybody can unmute themselves now. And over to you to moderate this final session of day two. Thank you in advance for doing this. Thank you.
And thank you, Michael, and for all the hard work you've been doing for this particular event and throughout all your efforts with PBEC. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today to talk about one of my favorite subjects, Canada. Now, just to start things off and just make a couple of statements, that Canada has been and continues to be actively commercially engaged in the Asia-Pacific region. Politically, Canada used to be known for swinging above its weight globally and in the region. But frankly, it has lost some of its luster in the last 10 years, and maybe through a lack of attention, focus, and certainly some difficulties with the big guy in the region. But coming out of COVID and responding to geopolitical commercial realities, is this about to change? And what are the commercial implications for Canada and the Asia-Pacific region? To discuss this today, we have three very experienced businessmen. Todd Handcock. He is the president, Asia-Pacific and global board member of Collinson, a global leader in customer engagement and loyalty programs, whose businesses include the world's leading airport lounge and experience program, Priority Pass. Todd is also the past chairman and current head of the Governor's Council of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce in Hong Kong, a title which I can also claim, and it is Canada's largest business organization outside of Canada. Patrick Bennett heads up macro strategies for the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce in Asia. He's working with Canadians and regional clients, and I'll quote this from his bio because it's worth saying, to bring Canada to Asia and Asia to Canada. Very appropriate for today's discussion. He is a New Zealander and who spent 28 years in Asia and 12 years with CIBC. And he's here basically to keep the Canadians in the panel honest. Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you.
And last, by no means least, is Wayne Farmer. He is the managing partner of Almont, a boutique advisory firm, originating, leading, and structuring investments in the region. And he is the current president of the Canada-ASEAN Business Council, headquarters in Singapore, an organization doing excellent work under his guidance. I would like to split today's conversation into two sections. First, the state of affairs and opportunities in the Asia-Pacific, followed by the state of affairs and opportunities in Canada. And I'd like to start off, if I could, with you, Wayne. What are your views on what's happening in this region?
Sure. Thanks, David. Appreciate the kind comments. Well, look, I think that you are right in your initial comments that Canada has been a little bit of a lack of attention in this part of the world, but I think that predates the last 10 years, more like the last 20 or 30 years, where we've been perceived as in and out of the region, and our commitment to growing our business here has been a bit more haphazard than focused. And despite that, we have made rather large gains in both, let's say, North Asia and Southeast Asia. Today, certainly the pendulum has swung in terms of Canadian business interest and certainly government policy towards the Indo-Pacific. We're all awaiting this Indo-Pacific strategy, or the full Indo-Pacific strategy. We've been getting little pieces of it lately. My understanding is hopefully we'll get that by the end of the year, but certainly there is a strong focus on ASEAN. As you know, we've gone from a bit of famine to feast with two official free trade discussions underway, one with Indonesia, which is a bilateral, another one with ASEAN as a whole. The Prime Minister and our Minister of Foreign Affairs and Minister of International Trade were just in the region for three very important summits: the ASEAN Leaders Meeting in Cambodia, the G20 meeting in Bali, which I attended, as well as the APEC meeting in Bangkok. A whole raft of spending and initiatives were announced, both economic and militarily, and aid for this part of the region. And certainly it's focused, it's a very heavy focus in terms of current government policy and engagement. You know, in terms of the elephant in the room, as you mentioned, the relationship with Canada and China, it's not at its best, to make an understatement, unlikely to get better anytime soon. Some of it is geopolitical driven, but a lot of it was happening anyway, with shifting of supply chains to places like Vietnam, Indonesia, perhaps even to India can be thrown into that argument, partly due to labor availability, labor costs, increasing domestic focus of the Chinese production economy, and that was all happening anyway. You now have some geopolitical pressure, given the politics that the world is kind of dividing into either, you know, you're on our side or not, which does make it difficult for middle countries and trading blocs like ASEAN to kind of navigate where their natural allies are, yet who desire to continue to trade with some of the countries who might be perceived on the other side of the table. Certainly in Canada at the moment, in critical industries such as EV, battery, and others, there is a move to decouple from China, which is being driven by politics, our relationship with America being one, but also a better need to retain ownership of these critical resources and to bring back more value-added processing into the economy and employment within Canada. So that's a trend that's going to continue for some time. I think in terms of opportunity set, what I talk about, Canada has a lot to offer, both for Asia and ASEAN in particular, are a few things. One is dealing with the issues of food security, which is a big question since COVID has come up. Energy security as well. We constantly are asked about our tech sector, in particular, our abilities with decarbonization, smart cities, clean tech, how we can help Asia and ASEAN to move in this direction. As I mentioned, supply chains are continuing to shift into ASEAN, particularly Vietnam, Indonesia, but also Philippines and a bit further. I think the other big thing that we're constantly asked for is as a large institutional investor base that we're encouraged to be more active in this part of the world. And as you know, many of our pension funds now have offices in Singapore and Hong Kong, and have increased their presence in the region, particularly in infrastructure, amongst other things, which has a huge demand in this part of the world. In the other direction, Canada is very much seen as a leader right now in those markets that I mentioned, in EVA and critical minerals, and other of our countries in ASEAN that we have trade agreements with, such as Korea, Japan, Vietnam, are very eagerly following into those areas. Vietnam is certainly looking to take advantage of some of the dislocation in the supply chain to be a much bigger partner to North America in industrial manufacturing and goods. Korea, with their automobile tech battery companies, are clearly coming into Canada and coming into North America via Canada. Japan as well. I was just in Ottawa, and I did meet with the Vietnam and Korean ambassadors, and it was very encouraging to see what they had, what they were seeing vis-a-vis Canada. And look, Canada has just announced a desire to increase immigration to about 500,000 people per year coming into Canada. I'm not sure that the housing market and whatnot can actually support that. It might be a little wishful thinking, but certainly the trend in our direction of travel in terms of immigration to Canada is to increase people coming into Canada. Asia Pacific and ASEAN are very much targeted for those types of immigrants coming into our country, both on the tech sector, but a variety of industries, from nursing to engineers to mining skill sets to many things that you could see. So clearly, it's a time for Canada to we can't rest on our laurels. I think part of the success we're seeing in ASEAN is an unusual continuity of government policy at the federal level through both the previous Harper government as well as the current Trudeau government. This thrust into ASEAN and to increasing our presence here, negotiating or achieving the start of a negotiation on an FTA was begun under the Harper administration, kept going through the Trudeau administration, and indeed has been emphasized and pushed forward as policy, supported by global affairs in the provinces. So it's an example where continuity of policy over several governments is starting to achieve some long-term impact, both for Canada in ASEAN and ASEAN in Canada. So there's a lot going on, and certainly you can see the economies in ASEAN coming out of COVID are really are surging. Singapore is almost surging to the point of overheating, I would say, but Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines are all coming out of the gate quite well, and it's certainly coming back to being the growth engine of the world's global economy in this part of the world. So with that, I'll pause there. That was a little bit of a long run-on sentence, but that's kind of what we see happening here in this part of the region.
Yeah, that segues well to my next question, which is going to be for you, Patrick, because of your experience with the bank and investments. That part of it, you're obviously looking at it. From your perspective, what are you telling your Canadian clients when you're talking about Asia Pacific?
Yeah, thank you, thanks, David, and thanks, Wayne, for your comments here as well. And I share some of the, a lot of the same sentiments. And yes, as you pointed out earlier, as I mentioned to you, our role is bringing Canada to Asia and taking Asia to Canada, and that's been successful for us over a period. But certainly, we're looking now, and if we look at the environment now, then I would say the breakdown in globalization is one which is concerning for us. It's concerning for our clients. It's really a step backwards from where we were. It really overshadows a lot of ambition right at the moment. And some of that, we can see this interconnectivity between industries, which was growing quite strongly, perhaps back in the the early 2010s, has stepped backwards. So I think that makes the forging of trade and investment partnerships more difficult. And if we add to that, the rise in geopolitical tension, and of that is of many colours of that. And we add into that has introduced a risk premium for our clients when they're looking at investments here in the region, or partnerships in the region, or vice versa. Those risk premiums have certainly gone up, and we can see that quite clearly with China. We can see that portfolio flow has been outward of China this year. So the opportunities to go back in, the risk reward and the internal rate of return that clients are looking for these projects is just not quite at the same level that they're comfortable to take those strong steps. One example I point out, though, and it involves APEC, is, and Wayne touched on it earlier, about the pension funds that have set up here in the region and have been very strong investors looking for opportunity. And drawing the example of pension fund investment into the New Zealand forestry industry in the middle of the last decade, whereas Canada at that time became New Zealand's largest contributor of foreign direct investment. Now, the reason we believe that Canadians and New Zealanders, and that's where I sort of come from the angle I come at it from. They share the same language, or mostly the same language, the same system of government, or mostly, and the same sort of legal system. So that allowed, or that promoted this investment flow to transact on a much simpler basis. So I think the free-trade agreements and the agreements that Wayne spoke about, with ASEAN, I think are very encouraging. The idea of setting up offices, that the government may set up offices here in the region, if I'm not wrong, I think are going to go a long way towards creating that synergy between the outflow, which we know is there, and again from the pension sector, and the value that we know is here in this region, as they build towards greater levels of infrastructure, as they build towards greater levels of education, medical, all the technological sciences, which we expect to be a very strong flow in the next few years. One other kicker that we have that we're talking to our clients about now is the fact that through 2022, the loonie, the Canadian dollar, has outperformed most other major currencies around the world. A lot of currencies here in Asia are weaker against a stronger overall US dollar, but the Canadian dollar is stronger, and so that's helping to cross that divide a little bit between that on that risk reward basis. So assets here and opportunities here have become just a little bit cheaper because of that, and that's something that we're talking to our clients about very actively right at the moment.
Not spending a lot of time in Canadian dollars except at the cabin, but I don't follow it that closely. Todd, now what a lot of people don't know about you is, while you've had a pretty broad corporate experience in your different roles, you're also a keen investor in startups, which, if I understand the themes of almost all based on taking advantage of globalization in the marketplace. What are your views on the region?
Yeah, thanks, David. I see myself as fortunate because I get to look at the region through three quite different lenses. One as an investor in startups, and most of those startups have keen either roots in Canada or keen connections with Canada, and then the Indo-Pacific region. Obviously, my role as a global board member and head of Asia for an international company that has deep roots and interests across the region, and then, of course, representing the Canadian Chamber of Commerce and our constituents there across multiple interests, et cetera. I'd say that those three lenses all actually come together with one core thing, and that's that the continuing opening up of economic cooperation, the removal of trade barriers in both goods and, I know your perspective, services, importantly. We all know that opening markets drive economic growth, it drives innovation, it creates jobs, and I'm happy to see that we've had a lot of continued discussions over the many different meetings in the last couple of weeks in the region. Like you and Wayne, I bleed maple syrup when it comes to supporting Canada Indo-Pacific commercial interests, and I guess what I'd like to see is an increasing in pace. And maybe I'll just qualify my next 2 points. First of all, trade negotiations are complex. They're never as straightforward as they appear. And then secondly, a lot of progress has been made over the past 3 decades of say, since the inception of APEC. But the conversations over the last couple of weeks have really given me a flashback to 1994 when I was working within the Canadian Embassy in Jakarta. And we, at that time, Jakarta hosted the APEC Summit. And while recognizing the multilateral relations, negotiations, et cetera, are complex, I am uncomfortable. I'm concerned at the pace at which things are being hammered out. We've seen progress. We've seen a number of different types of trade agreements, but several of those themes from 1994. So I went back and took a look at my notes. Several of those themes are generally the same themes that we're hearing about the last couple of weeks. And I think they'll probably be reflected, some of those themes, in what Wayne's just referred to in terms of the Indo-Pacific strategy that hopefully we'll see in the days to come. Those themes include development of infrastructure between and within APEC economies, human resource development, enhancing competitiveness of small and medium-sized enterprises, promotion of private sector participation in APEC activities, the opening of trade, enhancing inter-region investment and economic growth, and maintaining the overall momentum of trade liberalization. So again, I'm not saying that the progress has not been made, but as a business person, as an investor, as someone who represents a business chamber, I do believe there's a need to accelerate the pace of not just the discussions, but the actual execution. And when I see statements come out of some of these discussions that refer to implementing an outcome by 2030, or in one case I saw by 2040, in 17 years' time, it gives me cause for concern as a business person that we're not moving fast enough. If we're truly serious about unlocking the potential of the amazing region by opening up economic cooperation, we need to get our skates on, to use a Canadian term. We need to do this at pace that supports our businesses and our economies today, not just into the future. And then let me also talk about the other place we need to get our skates on, and that's Canadian companies. There's no doubt that this region will be the most important economic region for Canada for the next several decades. And we've heard both Patrick and Wayne talk about that in different ways. Canada has enormous opportunity for this region. It's a world leader in AI, biotech, food tech, food safety, mining, renewable energy, ocean tech, infrastructure, and many, many more. And there's a large opportunity for Canadian companies who are bold. And Dave, you and I have been talking about this for probably as long as we've known each other, 20 plus years, for those Canadian companies that are bold. And those opportunities they're across the region, from Japan through Western China and the Greater Bay Area, through ASEAN, South Asia. I've personally had the opportunity and the benefit of living in Jakarta, Singapore, Tokyo, and Hong Kong, and leading businesses north to south and east to west. And I've just seen so many places where there's vast opportunities for Canadian companies in almost every sector. And the fact that in most markets, the arms are open to Canadian companies. And maybe something I'd like to point out is that governments across the region have good incentives for international companies to set up shop in their markets, including Canadian companies. And last night I was at the Singapore Emerging Enterprises Awards, and some of the companies that were actually recognized by the Singapore Minister of State were overseas companies that were given incentives to come to Singapore, create their presence here, and then through various Singapore government programs have accelerated their overall growth. We see similar programs that exist in Hong Kong. It was talked about on one of the earlier sessions about the Hong Kong Science and Technology Park and Cyberport, et cetera. And most markets across the region are there to open up their arms. And I do want to applaud the Canadian government. I think Wayne is correct. That consistency that we've seen across the last couple of administrations is good. Oftentimes, as you change administrations, those policies change and we don't see that consistency. I think it's really important as we look to the medium and long term. The Indo-Pacific strategy that hopefully we'll see in the next few days, and then also the recently announced ASEAN Gateway to be established in Singapore, both, I think, good investments by the Canadian government. And then I also want to applaud the Asia Pacific Foundation, which is now headed up by our former Canadian Consul General in Hong Kong, Jeff Nankivell. He's setting up a Canadian alumni conference to be held in Singapore in February. That conference will host for the first time up to 400 Canadian alumni that are living in the Asia Pacific region, with really the purpose of connecting the interest dots, the Canadian interest dots across the region.
And you guys want to step in while we're still sort of just focused on the Asia Pacific region before we move back to a little bit more in-depth discussion of Canada?
Sure, perhaps I can say something. Todd, while I agree that sometimes these dialogues take an exceedingly long time to come to fruition on various matters, I would suggest that our engagement with ASEAN has actually been fairly quick. You know, it takes two parties to tango, and obviously dealing with such a 10-nation grouping with various economic or various economies and resources takes a while to work through. But I think we got through the cusp of that last year with announcing a go-ahead on a bilateral with Indonesia, who, if taken at face value, would like to wrap up a bilateral deal at the end of next year while they're still host of ASEAN, which is their chairmanship over the course of the next year, 2023, which would lead to, I think, an acceleration of the discussion with ASEAN, because some of the challenging chapters will in effect be the same for both these discussions. So I think if we can solve that for the Indonesians, we can hopefully solve that for the rest of the ASEAN nations. And as you know, for the existing ASEAN nations already in the CPTPP, which will have has a higher bar anyway. So I think we are making some good progress, and hopefully we'll get some results in the next little while, which I look forward to, so I can hand my hat off to someone else eventually on this endeavor we're in. I would say that. Yeah, look, I mean, I think we are making progress, and that it is coming. There are some twists and turns. I mean, we do have some new emphasis on new chapters in our trade policy, including gender, environment, labor, indigenous rights, which are all features of you could say modern day trade discussions, not just the business aspect, and that takes a little bit to navigate. I think from an aspirational point of view, everybody's okay with it. It just depends on how much of it becomes necessary to complete, the discussions, and those are work their way through. I noticed a question here too about Canada-Philippines relations under Marcos. If I could speak to that, I think that under the previous government, Canada and Philippine relations were a bit testy, perhaps a little bit reset in the last year or two. The election happened. I think much like most of the Philippines businessmen that I speak to, Canada has been cautiously optimistic about the trend. It's been about business. It's been about getting the economy and society back on track, not about sort of past history. And I think that the Philippines is a big supporter of our discussion with ASEAN, and would like to see a much deeper engagement with Canada going forward. So I think we're on a pretty good footing here with the new administration and they with Canada, and I hope that continues moving forward.
The new administration in the Philippines has certainly been a breath of fresh air. A lot of us had a lot of trepidation, and so far it has our worst fears have not been met. Patrick, do you want to disagree with anybody?
No, look, I see it, and I feel from the to the level of the getting these agreements in place, and very much hear from Wayne about it's not an easy thing, and you get these two parties together and go back to stress that point I was making earlier, how that deal, how those deals have been done before on a common basis. So I think that's very important, and just would like to reiterate that. And I think from what I've seen of the offices being set up here, and I mean like officially, I think that's going to be the path forward. I think there's a real demand, both inward and outward, which is not yet being tapped fully. But I think it's a matter of an education and understanding front that has to be overcome first and foremost.
Okay.
And I might add, with respect to Canada and ASEAN, it is a testament to the hard work that we are in a pole position right now negotiating a free trade agreement with ASEAN when they have a lot of different parts of the world knocking at the door. The UK, which is having to rebuild all their trade relationships, the EU, other Asian countries, and the ASEAN selected Canada as their current group to negotiate a trade agreement with. So I think that is testimony to a lot of hard work on a lot of folks, both in the public and private sectors, to get us there. And I think it's also reflective of a trading nation that's composed of smaller powers that see a like-minded nation, Canada, that believes in a rules-based trade, a global trade order, survives on trade, that together, if we can come to agreement as a catalyst to increase our trade, that it makes the whole system stronger and provides alternatives and risk diversification vis-a-vis some of the geopolitics that's going on between America and China, where we're all trying to navigate our way through that. So I think, and so look, these agreements we're striking right now in ASEAN are all about the future. They're not about the current volume of trade and business. It's significant, but it's not as significant as Germany or the UK or Japan in this part of the region. But this is about looking towards the future and what can be built using these agreements as a catalyst, as Patrick said, to stir more bilateral trade in both directions and capital flows as well.
Maybe it harkens back to days when we did have a better brand, when Canada was seen as the fair partner, the guy you want to do business with, because we were straight shooters. And so maybe we can burnish that image a little bit, and maybe that's one of the reasons why ASEAN chose us. An agreement struck with us would take a look at both sides of the deal, and Canadians are known globally as a culture to be the fixers, to be the ones to throw in the middle of a problem where people aren't getting along. It's calling the Canadian fixer. But let's leave that part there. We can certainly get back to it. But I did want to just shift the conversation to talking a little bit more about Canada. And Todd, with all your business and investments, and what we were leading into is the whole issue of people. It's all business isn't computers. That's all I do. It's the people. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an amazing opportunity because of the people connection between Canada and the Indo-Pacific region, and maybe I'll start by just leveraging some stats about the Canadian diaspora, so people with Canadian passports that are living in this region. What I would consider to be the extended Canadian diaspora, so people who maybe studied in Canada and have a real affinity for Canada, but don't necessarily carry those passports. And then also the Asian diaspora that is living in Canada. So I'll start with that last one first. Canada is actually home to over 1 million people of South Asian descent. And in 2021, there were slightly more than 7 million people living in Canada who had reported of having Asian origins. So I think that's an incredible number, because that means it's 19.3% of Canada's population has Asian origins. And we take a look at Hong Kong. Hong Kong has approximately 300,000 Canadian passport holders. We've got several 100,000 holders of Canadian education degrees, diplomas, and accreditations that reside in the region today. In fact, there are over 38,000 students from the ASEAN region alone currently studying in Canada. So all of this represents a really significant opportunity for enhanced economic cooperation between Canada and the rest of the region, as it reflects very strong cultural, personal, and commercial ties that can and should be leveraged more. And it not only includes Canadian companies coming to the region, but also vast opportunities for investment into Canada from Indo-Pacific region countries. So some of those areas where FDI from the Indo-Pacific into Canada represents significant opportunity is in our Canadian superclusters and the categories within that. So that includes digital technology, the protein industries, advanced manufacturing, artificial intelligence, and ocean tech. So I think there's a real opportunity that for all of us to tap into that. And I'll talk a little bit. I talked about it earlier, but Jeff's initiative with the Asia Pacific Foundation, where he's going to bring together up to 400 alumni that are living in the region. Most of them that were not Canadian before they went to Canada. Some of them now have Canadian passports, but connecting those dots across the region, across literally hundreds of thousands of people living in the region and millions of people that are living in Canada, presents a significant opportunity for us as we look forward and hopefully get additional investment going both directions.
Well, Patrick, that leads in quite comfortable with you and what I want to talk about next. So with this move from west to east, how come you don't have hundreds and hundreds of clients just waiting to get on the bus to Canada to start investing in these Canadian companies and bringing the experience, saying, now let's bring it back the other way?
Yeah, look, absolutely. Immigration, and Wayne touched on this earlier as well. That it's a very important component. Right at the moment, to reduce labour market pressures, in Canada, COVID, of course, has reduced people's mobility. Notwithstanding again that Wayne touched on, the pressure on the housing market. But I think that this creates, this flow of people. Obviously creates that demand for infrastructure both in Canada, housing and medical, schooling, etc. And it creates that opportunity for partnerships to be formed. That it's not just Canadian businesses, but it's a partnership between businesses and businessmen and women from the ASEAN region into Canada as well. So I think that's something which is perhaps underrepresented. It's underrepresented as well on the outflow. We're seeing, supply chain. We know that supply chains have been a hot button for us, for some time, but we're still aware of, of products and areas where, raw material may head out of Canada, go into the ASEAN region, and be sent back as a finished product. And we need to move towards opportunities where there can be partnerships between ASEAN companies and the Canadian businesses, to start to make that something more greater added value. Wayne touched on this earlier about the trade agreements looking forward, rather than now. And if we do look at the moment, the trade deficit, Canada more so has a trade deficit with most of with the vast majority of the ASEAN region, because we're dealing with in times low value but very high volume product. So I think there's a lot of work to be done in that, and I'm sure that Wayne and the team and everyone working on these agreements are looking forward to that. So I think we're at the very early and very early stages where there's encouragement to move forward in this. Immigration, yes, very important. Education, even though that's an export and it is on the outside of the ledger, I think the partnerships within Canada of education services, moving and campuses, joint campuses between ASEAN and Canada, I think is a strong opportunity forward as well.
Yeah, I would comment, Patrick and Todd, in terms of educational ties. It tends to be very much students from the Asia Pacific studying in Canada rather than Canadian students studying in ASEAN. And I think we need to all do a better job of encouraging native Canadians to come to this part of the world to study, whether it's in Singapore or Thailand or Philippines or Indonesia. It's a bit one-way focused, which isn't bad. It's a starting point, but I do think we need to focus on that a bit more to build up those people to people ties, which ultimately commerce will be driven on. I think that was the only comment I had of Patrick. I will take the opportunity to plug the CIBC for a moment. Building on some of this momentum in Q1 of next year, probably short. We're actually negotiating with APF about timelines in this, Todd. We are going to be having our Canada-ASEAN Business Council Forum for the first time in several years, where we have about 300 to 400 senior level business and government executives, and that will be in Jakarta, supporting the fact that we do have a bilateral we're trying to push to a close towards the end of the year. And the fact that it's Indonesia is ASEAN's chair for next year. So those of you in the audience or who might be interested, please feel free to reach out to the CIBC. Would love to have you there and your input. Again, we expect to have the ministers out as usual. And again, it's another step forward in engaging with ASEAN in the greater Indo-Pacific from there. And we should have our strategy hopefully announced by then, which will feature as some of the discussion at that event.
When was that planned, Wayne? Do you have a date on that or approximate?
Yeah,
date?
towards the end of Feb, I think, if I'm correct. We'll be announcing that soon. But there will be a week of activities here in Singapore, including ABLAC, as well as the APF's alumni event, and then our event at the end of the week. Slightly different audiences, and we'll be in Jakarta. But I expect quite a few folks will be attending all three of those.
Well, since we're plugging organizations, let me just plug PBEC a bit on that, because we're not as well known. We've been around longer, but if you take a look at our membership, they're entrepreneurs and business owners in the Pacific Rim, heavily weighted towards this side of the Pacific. And one of the reasons that we do want to address that, we're doing good work in South Central America. And part of my remit is to try and find more North American individual businesswomen who could network. But Patrick, you should be fishing our membership list for potential clients. Some of them got some serious money and they're looking to invest, and you could be taking them into Canada. Collinson, does Collinson want to put in a commercial there? We all know CIBC.
No, I'll leave Collinson off the table for the moment.
Okay.
I was just going to say that it is great to see the work that Canada-ASEAN Business Council has been doing, and under the leadership of Wayne, and for me, heartening to see that first connection being with Indonesia. It's where I started my Asia Pacific career back in 1993, and since then I've always been a strong believer that there was a significant opportunity between Canada and Indonesia. So really happy to see that, and great to hear, Wayne, that you're planning to have your conference there in Jakarta.
I'm just taking a look at the chat list. Wade, you might get a few people signing up. Everyone was happy with the plug. Yeah, and a number of people agreeing with what we have to say both about on a number of different issues. So, anything more specifically about Canada that we think we should touch on? I think there's a couple of opportunities that we've been working on that just come out of some of the things you said. The issue of Canadian Aboriginal rights, and the fact that very much PBEC is connected with the Pacific countries. And I know I'm not up to date, but there has been a great deal of work being done between the Indigenous tribes in New Zealand, through the Pacific Islands, all the way up to the west coast of Canada and into the prairies, looking at business opportunities in the Aboriginal community. And it seems to me that would be a natural place for Canada to put its oar in and start doing some serious digging. I don't know what the opportunities would be out of it, but it seems a common theme that Canada could take advantage of it with it's definitely it's change in policy in the last 6 years, recognizing some of the problems we've had and trying to address them. Anything else? Any other brilliant ideas? Specific? Okay. Well, there's Wayne mentioned the elephant in the room. I'm saving this for the end so they can cut this off the recording if we say anything illegal. Keeping in mind that 2 of us live in Hong Kong, we're going to talk about. I would like to talk about a frank discussion on the issues that Canada has been having with China, and how do you see Canada engaging over the next 5-10 years with China, and there are obviously threats, but there are also opportunities. Wayne, do you want to take a jump on that?
Sure. Look, I think despite all the contentious points of issues over the last few years, to be diplomatic, Canada-China trade has overall either grown, has grown in fact, and or maintained a very robust level. This is shifting. As I said before, there's some natural causes. There's a demographic issue regarding leading, to labor constraints in China that's going to play out over the next decade or more. Cost issues, domestic focus. Unfortunately, though, I think that some of the contentious issues in the relationship are not going to get better anytime soon. I was in Ottawa recently, a couple of days after 3 divestments were ordered on Chinese state-owned enterprises into the Canada critical mineral supply chain. I think there will be several more of those to come. And America is going to be following that trend as well. So I think critical industries, both for national security issues, as we're starting to more define them, as well as seeking just to capture more added value in terms of processing, not just shipping goods or raw commodities off to other countries, in this case China, to be processed, is increasingly become a focus of government policymakers. In this case, you have both the shipment of commodities that are viewed as critical minerals in a future energy supply, which is now following on under a national security kind of construct. I think China's reaction to those ordered divestments was quite mute, which was perhaps unusual given some of the reactions to less to smaller comments that have occurred, but I think there will be more to come, and that's an issue for Canada to navigate. So unfortunately, I think the answer is we do have to remain firm and look after our national interest while being open to trade where it makes sense, and not be pushed over. Perhaps some damage will be done in the short term to our exports of certain businesses, but that's just a fact of life. And I think by diversifying into other parts of Asia, like our initiatives in ASEAN, Korea, the CPTPP nations, our European trade agreement, having that diversification of markets is where we can protect ourselves in the short run. So I think on the flip side, those of us who are engaged in sort of particularly financial flows from China to Canada, again, are going to have to look at where those are going in the next few years. Certainly, there's a big concern on state-owned enterprise investment, again, into critical minerals, but in general, it's viewed very differently from private sector investment coming from China. And although, unfortunately, a lot of the investment has come from state-owned enterprises, so that's something that we all need to think about, particularly at institutions like CIBC, I would imagine, in dealing with some of the M&A that's happened and public listings that have happened over the last few years. So we're in a bit of a volatile environment. It's probably going to get a little bit worse before it gets better, but I think you just need to factor in this risk and into your business plan as a businessman, and make sure that if you have enough diversification in your supply chain or end markets for your goods, then you should be able to ride it out. And things will change over time. Geopolitics and commerce aren't static, right? So I think everyone on this phone call can remember 15 years ago it was China, 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 and now it's not. So it's just a cycle that we're going through, not helped by probably the politics of the day, but that will eventually that will work itself out while we focus on our businesses.
I think it's worthwhile for people to take a look back that even further than 15 years, that it was the current prime minister's father who was one of the first of the developed nations to recognize China at a time when, within not even living memory, within very, very close memory, we had soldiers in the field standing against China in Korea. And yet we found a way to reach across and develop a relationship and expand it. So it's I would say time heals all wounds, but the passing of time allows people to find opportunities. And I think Canada would do well to take a longer view on some of these things. But well said, Wade. You guys, either you guys want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I agree with Wayne. I mean, I think the opportunity to shift eyes a little south to ASEAN is a good thing in terms of differentiation. And while we're in a rough patch now, things change, things will change. We've gone through those cycles. When I talk to Chinese businesses today, they love working with Canadian companies, even through the Meng Wanzhou period, right? They were still looking at how could they work closer with Canadian companies. So there is an affinity. There is an affinity for the maple leaf within the business community, the commercial community within China. And something that Dominic Barton said to me when he was still ambassador in a side coffee conversation was, while on a political front, we have the party line that we need to say. From the Canadian business community perspective, there's an immense opportunity for influencing things in a different way, whether that be through business, through culture, through sports. We can influence relations aside from the political environment. And there's no doubt in my mind, having the Hong Kong hat on, that there's going to be significant opportunities for Canadian-China business relations as the GBA continues to form and build out. It's going to be one of the largest metropolis regions in the world. It's got significant amount of investment going in by both Chinese private companies as well as Chinese government entities, and pretty much any sector you can think of that Canadian companies have global leadership in, there are opportunities in that GBA area. So I think if we take a more of a medium-term look at it, I'm less concerned about the political saber rattling that's going on today.
If I might add one comment, sorry, Patrick, I jumped in front of you there, but which David, you'll appreciate. It's not only China where we have issues with. We are in a very difficult period dealing with our major commercial trading partner, which is America. This started under Trump and I think has worsened under Biden, where Buy America and American protectionism is probably at an all-time high in Congress and in the Senate. A lot of what we're doing from a government policy point of view is trying to make sure that Buy America programs, the Inflation Reduction Act, do not exclude Canada from participating as a third-party nation or an outside nation under that. A lot of time and attention has been spent, particularly since the Biden administration has been elected, to ensure that Canada's commercial interests are being protected. And so it's not just China. There is a delicate dance being done on that side as well of our overwhelmingly dominant trade partner, that we can't rest on our laurels, and it's a constant relationship that needs management. Perhaps less headline grabbing, less overtly contentious, but nonetheless, there's a lot of thrusts that we constantly have to be addressing and making sure that Canadian business interests are looked after. So we're in an era where we can't take things for granted as a nation, and we need to keep working on all fronts, both with our allies and our trading partners around the world, and look after our own interests, because nobody else will be doing it but for us, right? So So I just thought I'd add that in. You know, we have challenges in all fronts, which the folks are back in Ottawa are constantly working on.
I agree. Patrick.
Yeah, look, I think it just reiterates a comment I made earlier about this risk premium in markets, a risk premium for geopolitics, a risk premium for trade tension. If we look at I know we're talking Canada and ASEAN, but as Wayne touched on, the Trump administration and the trade tension between the US and China, which was more a front end to an ideological issue, and I think we're seeing that more broadly across the globe. We've moved from a multilateral to unilateral divisions. It's been emphasized by the supply chain breakdowns that we've seen, and I think it's even further risk which comes if we look forward to say 2023 under the influence of the most developed economies, under the influence of much higher interest rates, where economy activity is going to be slowing, where China's activity is also continuing to be slow under the outrun to their zero COVID policies and their property sector. And so the support for the global economy and the Canadian economy in 2023, which is not going to have a parallel that we saw back in 2008, 2009, 2011. That strong commodity demand, which came through because there was a huge infrastructure building program in China. That's not going to happen in 2023 and beyond. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of work to be done from here. I feel that we have the risk premium in markets is already built in. And if we can have some coming together, some meetings of the minds, then I have some degree of confidence that we can get through this. But it's again just another thing that we have to deal with, as Wayne rightly pointed out. Politics, geopolitics, and global economic activity, are not stagnant at any one time.
True enough.
David, I wonder if maybe a question actually to you, given the corporate hat that you wear, and I know how close to your heart the liberalization of trade and services is, and maybe Wayne can comment on it relative to the agreements that he's been working on. But what more do you think needs to be done in that space, and maybe it's between Canada and ASEAN as a starting point?
I'm not a great person to talk about the details of this, because I spend very little time thinking about governments and what they do. You've all heard my story about my dad, the civil servant, standing over my bed when I was 7 years old, thinking I'm asleep. You will not be a civil servant. You will not be a civil servant. But I do know there is discussion around data residency and data standards. And it's especially poignant for an organization like ASEAN because it's so bifurcated and there's so many different pieces at different stages. You have Singapore and Hong Kong at the leading edge of GDP per capita, and you also have Myanmar and Cambodia at the other end. But if people start putting up national walls on digitization, it just puts one more difficulty in front of small businesses or medium-sized businesses trying to get stuff done. And you need a corporate lawyer to handle all the different aspects of how to manage a client that has offices throughout the region and making sure they're not breaking any laws. So that would be, if we're looking for an opportunity to keep this region on the leading edge of digital transformation, that's where I would be hoping they're making some progress. Wayne, do you seeing any progress in that area?
Yeah, for sure. There are a couple of initiatives within ASEAN to create a digital, let's say, a digital framework. In fact, I think some of the ASEAN countries have struck bilateral agreements, particularly with Australia, I believe the UK, on digital commerce and things like data protection and where it sits and how it can transmit. And there is a movement within ASEAN to work towards a unified framework on that within ASEAN and get the various partner nations to sign on to that. It certainly does feature within our FTA discussion. It may end up being a separate agreement. But it certainly is a very big topic of discussion for the negotiation going forward. And Todd, clearly we would like this agreement to be much more than just about tariff lines, which obviously would help Canadian exports, but certainly Canadian services and service companies are of great interest to promote, particularly small medium enterprise by the government. At the Business Council, I could say, aside from the financial institutions, out of our 60 plus members, we probably have 40 different categories of company sectors within that. So you can see the diversity of business that Canada is bringing into ASEAN. And so services do feature. Will we get everything that we need in the discussion? Probably not the first round of an agreement, I would think. But if we're following the pathway that Australia and New Zealand who've had a free trade agreement with ASEAN in place for much longer, they have done subsequent revisions to that to modernize it step by step over time. And I think that's probably the pathway that we'll be on as well. But we need to get our first marker on the ground to get our comparative advantage back, and deepen our relationship, and then look and revise that over time. Trade agreements, much like anything else, shouldn't be necessarily locked in stone. They should be fluid to some degree, or at least being able to be opened as and when things change. And I think we're going in with that perspective on the discussion. So services certainly are part of the service company, and access to service industries are certainly part of the discussion that we're having with regards to the two FTAs in ASEAN.
Okay, guys, listen, I'm cognizant of the fact that we're running out of time, and I knew that we could go on for much more. We haven't even talked about hockey and how we should be exporting hockey more into the region. There's all sorts of things where we can teach the New Zealanders how to play properly and not use sticks and balls, but pucks and ice. But I want to thank all of you very much for your participation. Lots of good stuff. I wish you all a good day, and we'll see you shortly. I'm down in Singapore soon.
Thanks for moderating.
Thanks, guys. Great session. Thank you very much. And good luck to Canada tonight against Belgium.
Didn't even mention that either. Yeah, I don't know. I do not hold out much hope. But who knows? Miracles happened last night. They could happen again.
Yeah, let's go. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.